Hi there, I'm John McAdams, founder of the Big Game Hunting blog. And in this video, we are joined by a very special guest, Dr. Kevin Robertson. Today, Kevin and I are going to talk about rifles for hunting Africa, especially for thick-skinned game like Cape buffalo. Cape buffalo are really big, tough, and dangerous, especially compared to deer, elk, or even African plains game. Additionally, they also usually inhabit very thick terrain, so close range encounters, usually less than 100 or even 50 yards, are the norm. That is especially true when you are dealing with a wounded buffalo. He'll go to the thickest, nastiest stuff he can find and then wait for you to come in there after him. In those conditions, you might even have that buffalo come barreling out of the bush just 5 to 10 yards away. That doesn't leave much time at all to take a shot at him. That is one of the biggest, perhaps the most important difference between Cape buffalo and American bison. You typically won't need to make a very long shot on a Cape buffalo, but that also means you won't have as much time to react if something goes wrong. So with all that in mind, it should be pretty clear that you need a rifle you can trust your life to when hunting Cape buffalo. It needs to be accurate, sufficiently powerful, and unfailingly reliable under the most demanding conditions. As you will learn here shortly with some of the stories that Kevin shares, there are some rifles that make the grade, but many that don't, and hunters who get in a jam with one of those rifles can pay for it with their lives. So for this reason, I am pleased to talk to Kevin Robertson, who knows a lot more about the subject than I do. Indeed, he literally wrote the book on shot placement and bullet and rifle selection on African game. Dr. Kevin Robertson is a veterinarian and a licensed professional hunter. He began his veterinary and PH career in Zimbabwe and then wrote the best-selling book, The Perfect Shot, where he shares his extensive firearm, ballistics, and general hunting knowledge. He also authored the book, Africa's Most Dangerous, which focuses specifically on hunting Cape buffalo, and he has also recently published an updated version of The Perfect Shot titled The Perfect Shot 2. All of those books are outstanding resources for those planning a hunt in Africa. So in this episode, Kevin and I discuss the ins and outs of rifle selection for hunting in Africa so you can decide what fits your needs best as a hunter. So let's get started.
Well, good morning, Kevin. It is great having you back on the show again.
My pleasure, and I've been looking forward to this for a while. I'm looking forward to it immensely.
Okay, good. Well, we started our last interview, so for the listener that did not hear that episode, it's episode 97, and we talked about bullets and cartridges that are best suited for hunting in Africa. But we started that interview with a story about how things went sideways when a hunter that you were guiding used the wrong bullet on a sable. So do you have a similar story about someone that you were guiding having a rifle malfunction or the rifle otherwise fail at an inopportune time on a hunt?
I do, and it's probably it fits in perfectly with what we're going to talk about today. Okay, so I lived in had my ranch was just outside a little town called Karoi, which was the last town on the way to the Zambezi Valley and Lake Kariba in what was Zimbabwe. And the Zimbabwe Professional Hunters and Guards Association used to have a training camp in what is known as the Reefer Safari area. That was just upstream from Chirundu, which is the bridge where that crosses over into Zambia. So the licensing process to become a professional hunter or professional guide in Zimbabwe was you had to initially start just with a book exam, and that gave you passed that and you became a learner professional hunter or learner guide. And then you had to get your experience and keep a logbook, and after that, after you've done about a year or maybe 2 years of apprenticeship, you were invited to write the full license exam, which was another book exam. And if you passed that, you then had to go and do what you called the proficiency, which was a week-long examination where your examiner was your client, and you had to take him on a safari and hunt a dangerous animal in his presence. So in preparation for that final exam, what was called the proficiency, the Zimbabwe Professional Hunters and Guards Association used to hold a training course in the Zambezi Valley at the Reefer Safari, in the Reefer Safari area at what was known as Reefer Education Camp. And on this particular occasion, well, there was a time when it suddenly became vogue for a whole lot of young ladies wanted to become professional guides. And it was sort of on this particular occasion, there was a young woman. She was about 35 years old, and we called her Mrs. Haverchat because she wouldn't stop talking. And I took her and a second learner on a elephant hunt. So to get your license, you had to shoot 4 dangerous game animals yourself. That was a requirement. You shoot 4 dangerous game animals to be able to go to this final examination. And she needed some elephant experience. And in those times, what we allowed 2 learners to use the same elephant. So they would draw straws. One learner would do the initial shot, and then the learner would put in the backing shot, and then they could both claim that elephant as part of their dangerous game experience. So Mrs. Haverchat had a brand new Remington M700 in 416 Remington. This was probably in the early 1990s. So I think the 416 Remington had just come out at that stage, and a whole lot of them had been imported into Zimbabwe, and they were the cheapest sort of large caliber dangerous game rifle one could buy. And a lot of these guards were now using this rifle as guarding rifles. Anyway, so we wanted to shoot a tuskless elephant cow. That was the cheapest, and when the elephant was shot, then I would dissect it for the learners, and possibly that's how I mentioned before. That's how my book, The Perfect Shot, was the seed for my book, The Perfect Shot, was planted in on such occasions. Mm-hmm. So I accompanied Mrs. Haverchat and the second learner, and we found some elephant cows in the Jesse bush. And elephants in the Zambezi Valley were known as the bitches of the bush because they were notoriously cheeky, and they had been hunted at, and they were just aggressive, and particularly tuskless cows are particularly aggressive because an elephant's tusks are its tools, and if this elephant lived its life without these handy tools, they have to rely on becoming aggressive to sort of steal food from other elephants that use their tusks to strip bark off and things like that. So elephant cows are notoriously aggressive. So we got into this herd of elephants in the Jess, and there wasn't a tuskless cow there, an old cow that was tuskless. And this whole hunting incident took place in October, which and October in the Zambezi Valley is known as suicide month. It's extremely hot, and temperatures are into the 40 degrees Celsius are common, and that was as hot as that when the sun took place. So Mrs. Haverchat got into a position to this tuskless elephant cow, and I told her she could take a side brain shot, which she did, and she shot too high, and there was this elephant cow staggering around like it was drunk, and I shouted to her to reload and to shoot it again. And I glanced down at her, and I saw that the bolt of her Remington had frozen. It was absolutely, and she was battling to try and open the bolt. So I shouted at her, shoot it again! And she finally got the bolt lifted, and as she pulled it back and she tried to ram another cartridge in, and of course she had a massive jam. And what had actually happened, she'd actually pulled the extractor right off that little fingernail extractor. She'd ripped it right off. So
oh my!
All of a sudden, her new Remington M700 rifle was suddenly a very expensive club, and we were in amongst this. All these elephants were shouting and screaming, and there she was standing with a rifle with the cartridge case jammed into the chamber, and that was it. So luckily the other learner shot the elephant cow, and we managed to get out of there until you normally just retreat until eventually everything died down. But her rifle was absolutely useless. We had to take a cleaning rod and then go and beat the cartridge case out. It was quite interesting because after that, it was a real wake-up call, and after that, everybody that had a push-feed fingernail extractor rifle, we made them carry a cleaning rod with them when they went on their hunting expeditions. And you know what a pain it was to walk around the bush carrying a cleaning rod, because the only way to get those cartridge cases out was to knock them out with a cleaning rod. Well, subsequently, we had a chronograph on this occasion, and we went and chronographed some of those loads, and I think it was partly due to the hot environmental conditions, but that particular box of ammo was sending a 400 grain bullet down at 2,500 feet per second, which was probably the reason why it was just too damn fast, and that's why we had a problem with extraction. Anyway, that was very early on in my professional hunting career, and from that moment onwards, I viewed every rifle that had a push-feed rifle with a little fingernail extractor with the greatest of suspicion. It was a real learning curve for me. And I was very much against those rifles ever since then, and I remain so to this day. So, how's that for us?
Yeah, that's that's exactly what you don't want to happen. In your book, Africa's Most Dangerous, there's a picture of a bolt face from a Remington 700 with the extractor ripped off of it. Is that one that you're?
That is it. That is the same one. Yes, for sure.
Oh man. Well, luckily that lady was not out there by herself and had someone else with a good rifle and was able to bail that out, because that's a situation that someone could have very easily gotten killed with.
Yeah, no, that was a worst nightmare. And the trouble is, if she had been alone, or we'd been charged or something like that, because it's not inconceivable that could have turned into a very nasty situation if the other learner hadn't shot that elephant. So it was a great learning curve.
So what sort of characteristics do you like to see in a rifle that a client brings over to Africa, for both plains and for dangerous game?
I like to see a rifle that's been well used and thoroughly tested, if you know what I mean. The worst thing on a dangerous game hunt is to have a client arrive with a rifle that is absolutely brand new. I mean, there are in situations where the rifle guy arrives for a safari with the rifle that's never been fired before. There's a scope in a box and the mounts, and it's come in the box, and it's the PH's job to mount the scope onto the rifle, sight it in, and because the client doesn't want to shoot it. The biggest thing we find with people coming on safari, my biggest complaint was that just basically they are ill prepared for the occasion. You don't go to St Andrews in Scotland to learn how to play golf, or you don't go to Wimbledon Centre Court to learn how to play tennis. And coming on a safari, a lot of people, I find, my experience was, they are not suitably prepared for shooting-wise for the occasion. Most of their rifles they buy them for the hunt, and the scopes are mounted too high, and they haven't shot the rifles enough to iron out any problems that are potentially going to be problems. So to answer your question, what I really like is someone rocks up on a hunt, and the rifle, you can see it's been well used and well looked after, and the person is proficient with it. They said, I've had this rifle for 20 years, and I love it, and I've shot so many shots through it and things like that. Well, that's the type of what you want to see. But the worst thing you don't want to see is a guy with a brand new rifle that hasn't got a scratch on it. You can just see it's never been really used, and the person that brings the rifle doesn't really know how to shoot it. That's what I don't like.
So for the listener that is not familiar with the subject of push feed versus controlled round feed, you can listen to episode 65, and I go into that in detail. But so Kevin, you're very clear that controlled round feed is what you need for dangerous game, for buffalo, for elephant, etc. What are your thoughts on a push feed rifle for plains game?
For plains game, it's fine. But also, I'm for a client that's going to shoot one or two buffalo in his lifetime. I mean, you could certainly get away with a push feed action if you've got a professional hunter that's going to back you up and is competent at the job. My real concern was guys in the professional hunting profession or the guarding profession, where their lives depend on this rifle having push feed. So for a client to use a push feed, you could certainly get away with it. And certainly a lot of people do come out and hunt in Africa with Remington 700s and all the other push feeds like the Sarcos and things like that, and they seem to get away with it. So I'm not knocking them completely for the hunting client. What I'm saying is that for the dangerous game professional hunter or the professional guards, there's absolutely no doubt you need a controlled round feed, in my opinion. For plains game, well, certainly there are lots of very accurate push feed rifles. That Remington 700, as said, it was what they call it, the Ring of Steel, and it's notoriously accurate, and it's a very popular sniper's rifle. I mean, a lot of the many police departments and things like that use them. So I'm certainly not pushing them. I mean, not knocking them. They would certainly be acceptable for a plains game hunt, and also for a dangerous game hunt if you're only going to shoot a couple of animals in your lifetime. But for the person that relies on a rifle every day of his life, and he relies on it to keeping himself and his safari crew and his clients alive, in my opinion, that the only rifle to have is a rifle with a controlled round feed. Let me add a little bit to that. So when I was these training courses where we used to train the professional hunters, there were a couple of really interesting fellows on these courses. One of the guys, his name was Detective Chief Inspector Charlie Haley, and he was the head of ballistics for the Zimbabwe Republican Police. And also another well-known figure was Dr. Don Heath. He used to write under the name of Ganyana, and he was also very interested in ballistics. And we tested virtually every type of rifle that's on these courses. We used to do a shooting test. It was called Haley's Hop, and it was a fantastic test for not only a person's shooting ability, but also for how their rifles used to function. And all the test consisted of was 3 1 meter square or a 1 yard square piece of dark cardboard. There were 3 of them, and they were set up at 30 meters, 20 meters, and 10 meters from the shooting line. They were just painted a dark charcoal color. There was no aiming point on these targets, because we just used to say, just shoot it in the middle of the black. So if you ever got charged by an elephant or you got charged by a buffalo, not really time to aim, you just shoot it in the middle of the black. So on the reverse side of these targets, there was a 6-inch diameter bullseye, and then there was an 8-inch diameter outer bull. And the shooting test was, you stood on the firing line and you loaded 3 cartridges into the magazine of your rifle and closed the bolt onto an empty chamber. Then under command go, you had a chamber around, shoot at the 30-meter target, shoot at the 20-meter target, shoot at the 10-meter target, load 3 cartridges from your belt, and then shoot again at the 10, the 20, and the 30. So it was 6 shots, and it was timed. So eventually, and used to score it. A bullseye scored 10 points, and an outer bull was 5 points, and it was just score divided by time. So if you shot 60, you got 60 points in 30 seconds, well, then your score was 2. And I probably saw that test shot a couple of 100 times with all different rifles. And you cannot imagine, in the heat of the October, these courses used to be held in October, so it was really hot. I mean, we have seen rifles that with their bolts stuck, and guys were beating the bolts open with a brick. I mean, it was just, I tested everything. I tested how good their rifles fared, how good if their rifles fitted them. And what we also used to do, we used to help everybody fit their rifles to them, and then once their rifles were fitted, we'd make them shoot that same test with masking tape over their sight, so they couldn't aim. You just had a point and shoot. And if the guys could shoot really well, or even in the ladies could shoot really well, they could shoot the same score in the same time with no sights. You just point and shoot like you're shooting like a shotgun. And interesting, after all those tests, at the end of the day, there were only 5 rifles that we deemed suitable for professional hunting. And I see you've given me a list of some of these rifles. And the first ones were the CZ, the CZ 550, or the old ZKK 602, the old Bruno ZKK 602. Mm-hmm. Those were acceptable. We'll talk about them a bit later. The other one that was deemed acceptable was the Ruger M77 Mark II. The third one was the Winchester, the Pre-64 Winchester, and then the Super Express, the controlled feed Winchester. Mm-hmm. And then any other sort of Mauser action rifle. Quite a few of the guys came with sort of old, British-made Black Vickers or, just old British-made Webley, Jeffries or Vickers, or one of those Cogswell and Harrison type Mauser action rifles. Anything those are the only ones that deemed similar. And the people that had push feeds, eventually when they came to do their final exam, the instruction was, listen, by the time you're ready to do your final exam, you just make sure that you've got either one of these rifles. And that was what was recommended. And interestingly, the 500 grain .458 bullet at 2,100 feet per second was the sort of the recommended ballistics for guiding and for professional hunting. That was what they recommended, and how you got to that level of ballistic performance. So there were many different options. You could get to that performance with a 458, or most people went to lots, 458 lots, and that seemed to be the standard cartridge recommended for dangerous game hunting, for backing up on dangerous game.
It seems like the lot especially, it's easier to download that to 2,100 feet per second than it is to push the 458 Win Mag up to that kind of the upper tier of what its performance is, and get an acceptable level of performance out of it.
Oh, very much so. And the Brunos, or the old CZ, was by far the most popular make of rifle used. And that's got a super long action, and it was crazy. And the only thing that trouble with that rifle is to put a standard length cartridge into a super long action gave all sorts of problems. So the logical thing to do, if you had a CZ in 458 Win Mag, to just have it reamed out to lot, or even to lot Ackley, or even the 3-inch Express also fits in. So there are many different options, the way to do it. But the old CZs and the CZ and the ZKK 602 were notorious for having their stocks cracked. They were basically quite cheap rifles, and everybody bought them. And what you spent on the rifle, what you paid for the rifle, you normally had to spend roughly the same amount of money to get them to where we consider them to be suitable for dangerous game work. And that involved to cut the barrels off to 22.5 inches or 23, because they all came with 25-inch barrels. You had to then glass bed and double cross pin, or sometimes even triple cross pin the stock. We used to take off the two of the folding leaves of the sights, so there was only one standing leaf sight. And then quite often you actually even stain the wood darker, because a lot of those Brunos came out with stock that were almost a sort of a pine-colored wood, which were very light, and we felt that those stocks used to stain them darker. And once you smooth out the action, because those actions were, used to say there was rough as a badger's backside, but once you'd smoothed up that action and spent some money getting that rifle Africa ready, as we considered it, then they became fantastic rifles and were thoroughly reliable, and probably the most popular rifles used by the dangerous game fraternity in Zimbabwe, and certainly in South Africa as well. Most of the rifles in the Kruger National Park are those CZs as well. But every rifle needs some attention. If you don't glass bed the action or triple cross pin within the first 20 shots, that stock's going to crack for sure. So, but once you spend some money on the rifle, they became pretty decent.
Do you have any opinion on using a synthetic stock or something like that instead of a wood stock?
I just think that synthetic stock is probably a bit harder wearing. I'm a great believer. I love walnut and blued steel, but I have a good friend in South Africa, a professional hunter by the name of John Westhaven, and he's got a 505 Gibbs, a 458 lot, and a 375, all with synthetic stock. They're all exactly the same. Big problem with the synthetic stock is probably get them to be heavy enough so that the rifle weighs is heavy enough. Mm. The worst thing with the big game rifle is to have the rifle too light, because then the recoil just becomes unmanageable. Now, I've certainly got nothing against synthetic stock. I just don't think they look particularly nice, but I think they're very functional.
So you mentioned the CZ550, the Ruger Hawkeye, the Winchester Model.
Not the Hawkeye, the Ruger M77 Mark II, not the Hawkeye. It's the previous Ruger, the M77 Mark II. They brought it out. I don't think they make it anymore, but it had a magnum length action.
Yeah, they've replaced the Mark II with the Hawkeye, and it also has that same controlled round feed. Yeah. Okay, so the Ruger Model 77 Mark II, the Winchester Model 70 with the controlled round feed, the Mauser style controlled round feed action, and then just a couple of other Mauser style rifles there. And you said the 25-inch barrel was a little on the long side, so you said, 22, 23-inch barrel is probably pretty good?
Yeah, 22.5 to 23 inch. Most guys seem to shorten the barrel a little bit. Also, on the front end of those old CZs, they had a guard, sort of a sight protector on the front, and it had those angled, slanted rearwards, and that used to catch on everything. So eventually we used to take that guard off and just have a really sturdy bead on the front that with no guard on it, because that guard seemed to catch on everything. You mentioned the Ruger Hawkeye, and I've got some experience with the Ruger Hawkeye. I used to write for Sports and Field. I had a question and answer column in Sports and Field, and when the 375 Ruger came out and the Hawkeye model, I knew someone was going to ask me a question about it, and that time I was at the Dallas Safari Club show, and after the show I went to my friend Monty Calagiris at what was called the Safari Shooting School on his ranch outside Mason. So we went at the show. I went to Ruger and I asked him if they could send a Ruger Hawkeye to Monty's school, and I went to Hornady and got them to donate me a box of 375 ammunition. No, that's 375 Ruger. And we took this combination to Monty's ranch and we thoroughly tested it. And man, oh man, what an unpleasant experience that was. First of all, the Ruger Hawkeye, the rifle that we had weighed exactly 7.5 pounds. And we chronographed the ammunition, and that was sending a 300 grain bullet down range at 2,660 feet per second. And that just produced recoil. I mean, it was the most unpleasant rifle I think I've ever shot. At that time, America's most well-known gun writer was singing the praises of this rifle, and because he's left-handed, and they brought it out in a left-handed version. And after I shot it, I was absolutely horrified. I mean, that rifle was one of the worst recoiling rifles I ever experienced. Anyway, Monty, at his shooting school, he had what he called a buffalo course, where he had these life-size targets, and the kill zones were shoot-and-see targets painted black. So if you shot a buffalo in the right place, you could actually see the bullet hole that would change color. And on his typical buffalo hunt, you had a side-on buffalo, and then there was a second buffalo up going a hill was away. So you would load fill the magazine of the rifle. I think it took 4 rounds, and take a shot at the side-on buffalo, and then you immediately reloaded and took a shot at the buffalo going away as like a backing shot. And then you refilled the magazine, and then he had what you called a wounded buffalo follow-up, and he actually even had bits of red blood on the ground to emulate a blood spore, and you'd track this buffalo, and there would be a buffalo standing sort of half hidden in some bushes, and you had to take 2 shots at that. And as you fired, or 3 shots, as you fired your third shot, you pulled a little lever, and then you had a buffalo target coming down on a pulley system to emulate a charge, and you had to shoot at that as well. So with the first time we used this rifle for this test, there was 2 shots at the first and the second target, and then refilled the magazine, and then you do the follow-up, and you start shooting again. And by the time you shot the 5th shot, there was a stoppage. You couldn't chamber the cartridge. And what had actually happened was that because that rifle was recoiling so heavily, there was a massive amount of crimp on the bullets to stop the bullets from being pushed, the head of the bullet being pushed back down the neck of the cartridge. And so violent was the recoil that a cartridge that had been exposed to 4 doses of recoil. So you can imagine there are 4 rounds in the magazine of the rifle. The first 2 rounds get shot off, and you top it up, which is a very common practice in a hunting situation. You just top up the magazine. So by the time you get to shoot your 4th round, that round has exposed to 4 doses of recoil, and the heads of those bullets were being pushed back into the neck of the case. And because there was a massive amount of crimp on them, they were actually rolled over. So it looked like a polo neck sweater. And they wouldn't feed. And out of that box of 20 cartridges, we got 4 stoppages on that one box. So we got hold of Ruger and we got hold of Hornady and said, hey, listen, there's a serious problem with this, because this is going to get someone killed one day. And they were not interested in hearing about that at all. They blew us off. So I was rather disappointed, because I believe that there was a serious problem. And by the time we shot 20 cartridges through that rifle, the stock of that Hawkeye cracked as well. So I was really not impressed. I went onto the website there yesterday and just to check, and I see the rifles now weigh 8 pounds, which is probably a little bit better. But I firmly believe any rifle that sends a 300 grain bullet downrange at anything over 2,500 feet per second needs to weigh at least 10 pounds to make it shootable. Because rifle weight has a huge influence on perceived recoil. And that I just thought that Hawkeye was the most awful rifle to shoot. It really was. I was not impressed at all. Having said that, the M77 Mark II Rugers were vastly superior. I think they were quite a lot more expensive. I mean, they used to sell for about $1,500 or so, and they were absolutely beautiful, beautiful rifles.
Did you say that this Ruger Hawkeye that you were shooting was chambered in .375 Ruger?
Yeah, 375 Ruger. Yeah.
Yeah. That isn't it. So we talked very briefly about the 375 Ruger on our last interview, and it is interesting how it's got just a tiny bit more case capacity than the 375 H&H, and so then they just jack up the velocity a couple hundred feet per second. It is amazing what that extra, 200-300 feet per second will do in terms of your recoil and then everything else that comes along with it, like you just described in this case.
Right. Very much so. And you don't need to shoot that bullet that fast. I for a time I owned a Browning X-Bolt. It was given to me by a client as just a gift. He came on a hunt and he gave me the rifle afterwards. And that rifle also weighed 7.5 pounds. But with a scope on it and a sling and fully loaded, we got it to about 8.5 pounds. But that was still too light. And my clients, it was my client's rifle. So I had two rifles that I used to lend out to my clients. One was a Bruno ZG47 in 9.3 by 62, and that rifle weighed 10 pounds, and man, it was the most fantastic rifle. It's just, everybody could shoot it, the recoil was acceptable, and the ballistic performance of a 9.3 by 62 was certainly sufficient for everything that we hunted with it. We used to hunt buffalo with it. And that particular rifle, actually in its lifetime, it shot 650 buffalo, so it was a very accomplished rifle. But the Browning X-Bolt was weighed about 8.5 pounds when it was fully dressed up. And that, even then, my clients used to complain that they couldn't shoot it properly because of the recoil. So I started downloading the 375 to almost 9.3 ballistics. I would slow the bullet down to 300 grain bullet. I slowed that bullet down to 2,350 feet per second, and that made the rifle a lot more manageable. And then when 380 grain bullets came out, they were rhinos. I used to load 380 grain rhinos and even downloaded those to shooting about 2,150 to 2,200 feet per second. And that made the Browning X-Bolt a lot more manageable. Because I think we spoke about it before, there are three parts to recoil. It's the force that the rifle comes back into your shoulder, it's the speed of that force, and the duration of that force. So recoil starts the moment the bullet starts to move out of the neck of the cartridge case, and it ends when the bullet and all the expanding gases exit the muzzle. So if you have the longer the barrel, and if you take a heavier bullet going slower, so if you go recoil in particular, if you had to take the Hawkeye, it's got a 23-inch barrel, and you're taking a 300 grain bullet and you're accelerating that to 2,660 feet per second within 23 inches, the recoil becomes a vicious punch. As opposed to taking a similar caliber, if you take a 380 grain bullet and you have to accelerate that to 2,150 feet per second on the same barrel length, that the duration of the recoil is fractionally longer. And that seems to make a huge difference when it comes to perceived recoil, what you feel at the other end against your shoulder. So I managed to tame the recoil of this, or my Browning, just by using a heavier bullet and making it go slower. And so if you work out all the math of the feet pounds and the foot per second, that all seemed to stay the same. But what changed was the duration of the recoil. The recoil was spread out over a fractionally longer period, which made it a lot more seemed a lot more manageable, if that makes any sense.
No, definitely. And so I have a 9.3 by 62, and everything tricked out on it with the scope, sling, just like you said, it's just over 8.5 pounds, and it's bearable. It'll thump you, but it's I can shoot it at the range, no issues whatsoever, and hunt with it. That same rifle at 10 pounds, like your Bruno, I imagine, man, that would be just an absolutely sweet shooting rifle.
Oh, it was. I mean, even women could shoot it. And it's amazing just that another 1.5 pounds makes a huge difference to just how manageable the rifle is.
And for reference here for the listener, the CZ and the current production Winchester Model 70, both of them come from the factory right around 9 pounds, maybe a little bit heavier. So you put a scope and everything on them, and it's very easy to picture that rifle being just over 10 pounds.
Which I believe is perfect. And you can certainly carry a 10-pound rifle all day. When you start carrying it, and you add another couple of pounds onto that, and then all of a sudden you've got a 12-pound rifle. It makes a huge difference when it comes to having to carry that rifle all day. So 10 pounds is about the ideal weight, I believe, certainly for a 375.
Yeah, I would say so. Yeah. Sorry, go ahead.
To mention, there's a friend of mine, Monty, that had this safari shooting school. He had a a 375 that came from Wayne Jacobson of American Hunting Rifles. So Wayne Jacobson has sort of made a business out of taking Brunos and CZs and then getting them to where they really need to be. And this particular 375 had a beautiful walnut stock on it, or particularly dense walnut. And that rifle probably weighed a little bit more than 10 pounds, almost 11 pounds. And it was only 375 that I've ever shot where you could actually see the bullet strike in your scope. There was something about that rifle. Wayne had just got the dimensions of the stock exactly right, with a recoil that you could shoot and you could watch the bullet hit through the scope. And I've never been able to do that with any other. I can't even do that with my 9.3. But that particular rifle was amazing. You could shoot and see your bullet hitting. I mean, the recoil was so tamed by the stock dimensions and the weight of the rifle that you could actually see the bullet strike in your scope, which was fantastic.
Oh, that is perfect. We've been talking a lot about bolt-action rifles. Can we talk very briefly on your thoughts on someone that wanted to hunt with a lever action or a single shot or even a double rifle, kind of what the pros and cons of those are?
Okay, there was a time when everybody wanted to come and hunt a buffalo with a lever action rifle. And Doug Turnbull, of Turnbull Creation, he had what he called his big medicine. I think it was a 475 Turnbull. And he came to the Monte Caligaris shooting school and he brought this rifle and he tried very hard to convince me that this rifle was suitable as a dangerous game rifle. But you have to remember that within every country that hunts dangerous game, there is legislation in place which says how the minimum caliber required to hunt each different classification of game. And normally the minimum for dangerous game is a 375, and the other minimum that they stipulated that bullet has to produce 4,000 foot-pounds of muzzle energy. So in order to get this lever-action rifle to develop 4,000 foot-pounds of muzzle energy, and it was .475, it was a 470 caliber. It was loaded with 400 grain bullets, and I think they were doing 400 grain bullets were doing like 2,200 feet per second or so. And they just sort of made the logistics of being legal for buffalo. But I was not impressed because we spoke about it in the previous podcast about sectional density is, I believe, the most important ballistic factor when it comes to determining how a bullet's going to perform on dangerous game. And the 470, even a 500 grain 470, like the 470 Nitro Express, I believe that bullet is lacking in sectional density. Now you take that same bullet and decrease the bullet weight by another 100 grain. So it's a 400 grain, but I mean, the sectional density was in the 0.28 or something like that. I can't remember exactly what it was. And I just thought that the sectional density was way low. Also, a lot of guys have tried to come and hunt buffalo with these Marlin trail rifles shooting the 45-70. And sure, you can kill a buffalo with a 45-70, and many guys have done it, but in the eyes of the law, that is strictly illegal. And one thing that we learned very quickly in Africa is that all African professional hunters have a very healthy respect for the American legal system. Because just take a scenario. If, for example, you took a client out and you wanted to come and hunt with a lever rifle, and by chance things didn't work out and he got killed on the situation. And if someone suddenly realized, listen, you allowed this guy to go and hunt with a rifle that was basically illegal, I mean, you could have the pantsuit off you. So from that point of view, I was very much against anybody coming to hunt with lever-action rifles, mainly because there are very few lever-action rifles that will produce 4,000 foot-pounds of muzzle energy. And if they do, then they're using a bullet which I considered was too light. So my feelings on lever-action rifles are, man, they are wonderful in cowboy movies, and that's where they belong. They certainly don't belong, I believe, in the dangerous game fields of Africa. I'm probably going to get shot down over those sentiments, but those are my sentiments entirely. On the other hand, sorry, go ahead.
Now, I would imagine. So I have a Ruger. I'm sorry, not a Ruger. A Marlin Model 1895 and 4570, and that is a pretty lightweight, easy to carry rifle. And I would imagine that if I were to take a rifle identical to that and load it to the sort of ballistics that would be necessary to be legal to use on buffalo in Zimbabwe, that the recoil on that thing would be just absolutely brutal too.
I'm sure it was. Now, Doug Turnbull's rifle, that his big medicine, I mean, it was a beautiful rifle to shoot. I went and shot some wild hogs with it, and It was nice to shoot, but I mean, and it was manageable. There's his video footage. He's got a promotional footage where you see him. He wears this bowler hat and he takes a shot and he ejects the cartridge case, and the cartridge case shoots up and lands on the rim of his hat, which I thought was quite neat. But
Yeah.
I just didn't think that those rifles were suitable for Africa. On the other hand, if we talk about single shots, I'm a great believer in single shot. I love single shot rifles, mainly because my whole life, my only 22 caliber rifle I've ever owned is was a BSA, with an old target rifle that I sporterized. So I'm used to single shots, and I believe they're fantastic. Interesting, on those training courses that we did, that I explained early on in the podcast, that test we did was called Haley's Hop. We had to shoot 6 shots and you were timed and how you performed. The fastest I ever saw that test shot was shot with a Ruger number 1.
Oh, how about that?
And it was the guy, everybody mocked this poor old learner. He said, we said this rifle's totally unsuitable for dangerous game hunting. And what he did, he shot right-handed. On his left shoulder, he got his mum to stitch 5 elastic loops. And he had 5 cartridges on his shoulder facing rearward. So the bullet was facing backwards, but obviously the rim and the primer facing forwards. And he was so practiced that he could shoot a shot, and then with keeping his rifle in his shoulder, he could eject that first shot, reach across, take out cartridge from off his shoulder, slip it into that Ruger number 1, close it, and shot again. And he shot faster than anybody. Even if the guys with the double couldn't shoot 6 shots so fast, and he managed to shoot off with the Ruger number 1, which was a real eye-opener. And I certainly had no problems if a client wanted to come and hunt with me to use a single shot. I had no problems with that, mainly because if you know you've only got 1 shot, you tend to shoot a bit better. But also, I soon realized that you can reload a single shot rifle pretty quickly if you've got a cartridge handy like it was on the top of this guy's shoulder. Also, Ruger made a Ruger number 1. You could get that in 450, 400, which I thought would almost absolutely perfect buffalo cartridge, and that was a combination that did really well, and I really like that rifle. So I would certainly had no problems with single shot rifles.
Oh, very interesting. Good deal. And let's talk a little bit about doubles now.
Well, I think every professional hunter aspires to own a double, but when I was started professional hunting, the most important thing you needed was a Toyota Land Cruiser, and in those days a double rifle cost as much as a Toyota Land Cruiser. But I really loved doubles, and the professional hunters that hunted a lot of elephants, and I was not particularly, I wasn't really into hunting elephants. I much preferred hunting buffalo. But the guys, the PHs that hunted lots of elephants definitely needed a double. And nowadays, I think you spoiled for choice. Heim are probably the better ones, and also Bernie Corone, VC. And I don't think there's much difference between the two of them. I consider one would be a Mercedes-Benz and the other one's a BMW, and you either like one or the other. So certainly Heim and Bernie Corone are very affordable and beautifully made doubles. I have a friend of mine, he has a game range in the Kruger National Park, and his rifle of choice is a Heim in 450 Nitro Express. And that particular rifle, he had it regulated. He shoots a 500 grain bullet at 2,200 feet per second. And the nature of his work, he's basically a game ranger. That rifle is regulated too, and he can put 2 shots into the size of a dollar coin at 15 meters with his rifle. So very much like those two, Heim and Bernie Corone. A lot of people use the Krieghoff is also another popular double. And as a client's rifle, I think the Krieghoff is probably the best rifle for a safari client. And I say that because they have that unique safety catch cocking system where the safety catch actually is your cocking lever. For a professional hunter, I really don't like that because it takes you about an extra second to get your rifle cocked, and sometimes that second might be too long. Buffalo charges at 15 meters a second. So if you're getting charged by a buffalo, and it takes you an extra second to get your rifle safety catch off or the rifle cocked, that sometimes can be too late. So for dangerous game professional hunting work, I definitely prefer the other rifles. But from a client's point of view, because having been a professional hunter for nearly 30 years, there were many situations where I was actually more scared of my client than I was of the animals that we were hunting. I've had two of my friends have been shot by their clients. One of them, I've got a friend now, he's minus his arm. He got shot by a client with a 500 Nitro Express. Actually, it was a Holland & Holland Royal. They were hunting a warthog. I mean, just were looking for a warthog, and they happened to walk down off a little ridge, and the client happened to stumble and fell, and his rifle was loaded, and as it hit the ground, the safety catch came off and the rifle went off and shot my friend just above the elbow.
Oh.
Basically, he lost his arm. He lost his arm because of that. So I'm very lucky, well, fortunate that I'm built like a brick outhouse. And so I used to prefer to have my clients walk in front of me. So that they said that I could see over most of their heads. They walked behind me, all they saw was my big fat backside. If they walk in front of me, they could see a lot better. And one of the reasons I made it a joke to say, well, you can see better if you walk in front of me. But that way I could see what they were doing, pointing with their rifles. Because how do you carry a rifle? So if your client's got a bolt-action rifle, then normally you would fill the magazine and then close the bolt on an empty chamber. So the rifle's loaded, but the magazine is full, but the rifle hasn't got a cartridge in the chamber. And if we were hunting buffalo, and if we knew we were getting close and we eventually in the final stalk, that's what the time then you made sure that your client loaded his rifle and you made sure that it was on safe and you made sure his scope was on the right setting as that. But if you've got a single shot or you've got a double rifle, the clients obviously want to walk with one in the chamber. And that's where the danger came, is that, one, it's not nice walking in front of someone that's got a loaded rifle and all you're relying on is the safety catch. So I much prefer, and for that reason, I believe that the Krieghoff is a good client's rifle, because it's you feel a lot safer knowing that they're walking in front of a rifle that's not cocked and loaded. Well, it's loaded, but it's not cocked. Also, the trouble with double rifles is that most people, that by the time they can afford a double rifle and by the time they can afford to come on hunting, most of those people are at age where they cannot see the sights anymore. And putting a scope on a double rifle is a bit like putting a roof rack and a tow hitch on a Ferrari, and it just doesn't look out of place, in my opinion.
Yeah.
So, you've just got to admit the fact, man, when I got to 45, all of a sudden I woke up one morning and my arms had got shorter because I couldn't read the newspaper anymore, and suddenly now there were cheaters and things like that. So people definitely, I know we're going to talk about scopes a little bit later on, but I mean, people definitely shoot better with a scope. And they were also, having a scope increases your shooting opportunities because you can see better into the shadows. People shoot better with the scope. So if you want to have a double rifle and then put a scope on it, I just think it defeats the object. You might as well just use a single shot, a bolt action rifle. Having said that, some people use these little red dot scopes on doubles now, and that seems to make a difference. And doesn't look unsightly as a normal powered proper scope. I once had a continental client who came over. We were hunting buffalo in Mozambique, and he had a Blaser double rifle. It was just awful. But he had on it. He arrived with a Night Force like 4 to 12 powered, like a sniper scope on a 470 double. I mean, it was just ridiculous. It was like useless. I said, this isn't as good as teats on a bull. The reticle was so fine with this like sniper rifle that in the thick shadows of the brush in the Mozambique forest there, he couldn't see the reticle. And we had a buffalo exactly side on, and he took a shot at it, and the buffalo sat down like a dog. And I backed him, and I shot it. And his first shot hit it at the base of the tail. He was shooting for his shoulder, and he nearly missed the buffalo completely. And that was just because it was just totally the wrong scope, and you couldn't see the reticle in the thick shadows of the forests there. So that was just a classic example of it was just useless, absolutely useless.
Well, let's talk a little bit about scopes then.
Okay, definitely I'm a great believer that, especially for a dangerous game hunt, if you're hunting lion or leopard and buffalo as well, definitely a scope is almost a must-have. And it can be, my favorite scope of all was a Leopold. I had a Leopold on my 9.3, just a BX2, 1-4 power. But I mean, I had that rifle for 30 years, and once I started the rifle, and I'd never touched that scope in 30 years. I mean, it never went out. It always worked. It was just fantastic. The last thing about having a 1-4 power, if you ever had to follow up a situation where you could just dial the scope down to 1 power, so you could still shoot that rifle with both eyes open if you wanted to shoot it really quickly. My favorite scope for dangerous game, what I recommended is that 1.5 to the Leopold VX3, 1.5 to 5 with a heavy duty reticle. I mean, that's a really fantastic scope. For leopards, maybe now a leopard with a red dot, a little illuminated reticle in the center probably makes a huge difference. But we're talking about scopes. So what our biggest problem find with most people when they come to hunt in Africa, their rifles are not fitted. Nobody seems to take the time or make the effort to have get their rifles fitted. And most scopes tend to be mounted too high. A rifle is either stocked for open sight use or it's stocked for a scope. You cannot have one stock measurement that is perfect for both. And most dangerous game rifles are stocked for open sights, and then the clients put a scope on it, and especially for the quick detachable scope, that tends to be mounted higher than it really needs to. And when they shoot looking through the scope, their head is off the stock. To tame recoil, you really need a solid cheek weld. My kids call it a muffin top. Your head needs to be down on the top of the comb of the stock so firmly that your cheek forms a little bulge, what my kids refer to as the muffin top. But just by taking someone and looking at having them aim their rifle, you can see whether the guy's head is up off the comb. And if that is the case, he's not going to shoot well, because basically recoil is a lot more, felt recoil is a lot worse because you're not welded down your head's not welded down onto the stock. So I don't like detachable mounts, and most people my experience is that most people's scopes are mounted too high, and that makes their head off the stock higher than it needs to be.
So I guess, are people mounting their scopes too high because they're using too large of a scope with too big of an objective lens that has to be mounted too high, or what?
No, I just think the rifle is stocked for open sight use, and you cannot mount a scope as low as for open sights. If a rifle is stocked for a scope mount and it's got open sights on it, invariably you find you can't get your head down low enough to see the open sights anyway. And I believe people, I don't like detachable scope mounts. I believe you need to find the right scope, mount it as low as you can, and then get your stock adjusted or fitted to you so that your head is down properly, and then never take that scope off. That's my opinion.
And so in the rare instance where someone's scope might break or something on a hunt, then in that case, it would be better for that person just to use, a client rifle from the PH or something like that instead of trying to rely on their iron sights then.
I totally agree with you. Or just bring a spare scope, just have a second scope, bring along a second scope. That would be my opinion. But having said that, only in one occasion did I have a client have a problem with his scope. And that was, funny enough, it was a really expensive German scope, and it was a Smith & Bender, and he bought it second hand, and he said, I got a really good deal on the scope, and it was mounted on a 416, and he started the rifle in. But on that particular scope, when you finished the windage adjustment, there was a little screw that you had to screw in, which locked the mechanism in place. And the reason he got that scope really cheap was because the threads of that little screw had stripped. We didn't realize it at the time. And when he eventually hunted a buffalo and he took a shot, and his bullet landed up about 2 feet from where he was aiming. And we eventually, we had a gut shot buffalo, which turned into a horror show, but we eventually managed to find and kill the buffalo. And I said to him, "Man, was that where you were aiming?" He said, "No, man, I don't." And so he took another shot with his rifle just to see, and we suddenly realized that the rifle was way out. It was almost like shooting like 18 inches, almost 2 foot to the left. And that we realized then it was this little mount on the scope that had gone. That was the only incident in our whole hunting career where we had a problem with the scope. So generally the scopes nowadays are so good that I think you just find the scope that you like, mount it on your rifle, and you never take it off.
So I'm looking through all the things I wanted to discuss with you today, and it looks like we've gotten almost everything. Can you, so when a client arrives in Africa, I'm sure an experienced PH is going to be able to very quickly assess how familiar they are. So you talked about one, if you like to see that it's a well-used but well-cared-for rifle, that they clearly know how to operate, they know how to shoot, and everything. And anything else that you are assessing them on, when you're seeing them handle and shoot their rifle for the first time?
Oh yes, by the time you just say, well, let's bring your rifle, take it out of the case, and let's have a look at it. By the time the guy just takes it out, we can tell whether the guy knows how to shoot or not. I mean, it's so obvious. Just with that familiarity, just how to handle the rifle, how you open the bolts, and just general safety, always with the bolts open, or make sure that there's nothing in the chamber. Just generally their mannerisms, how they hold a rifle. I had a friend of mine who was a professional hunter. He had a continental client. So he met the client at the airport. They went through customs and helped him. And he was actually carrying the client's rifle case, got to customs. The customs guy said, I need to check the serial number. So he opened the rifle case, and first thing he noticed was the bolt was in the rifle, and that it was a Mauser rifle. He could see that the rifle was cocked. So he opened the bolt to open safety, and a live cartridge was ejected and fell onto the customs officer's foot.
Oh my goodness.
So that rifle had come all the way from Italy, loaded, off safe, in a rifle case. I mean, you can imagine what an unpleasant safari my friend had after that. He was so worried about his client, just no gun safety method, just pointing the rifle, just no safety at all. So how the client handles the rifle, just the way he picks it up and opens it, you can quickly tell whether he knows how to shoot or not. It's very obvious. Just you can't. That's something that only comes through practice and experience, is to be how you handle your rifle and how you handle it safely. And it's very easy to see someone that is ill prepared when it comes to that, for sure.
So we've talked a lot today about things breaking and things going wrong and people being inadequately prepared for their hunt. Can you share a story where things went right, and this story kind of demonstrates the sort of performance you like to see from a good quality rifle with a hunter that's also Africa ready?
There's probably not a story, but let me just tell you about a competition that we used to hold in Africa. So I spent 5 years at the Southern African Wildlife College, where we trained professional hunters and we trained guides, and we used to hold dangerous game courses for members of the South African Hunters Association. And at the end of these courses, we would hold a competition, and the competition was known as the Omelette Challenge. And it comes from the saying, to make an omelette, you need to break an egg. And what we used to do, we used to take domestic chicken eggs, just an ordinary old extra large chicken egg, and we used to super glue some fishing line onto the egg. And then we would hang that egg on the front of a target frame. On the frame was a piece of some white paper, and then we used to have a little arm that jutted out, and from that about a foot in front of the paper, we would suspend this chicken egg. And then the shooting distance was started at 50 meters, and everybody put in some money, and it was a bit of a competition. And you could only, the minimum caliber was a .375, and you had to shoot it with open sights. And the youngest guy would shoot first, going to the oldest, and everybody would take a shot at this egg, obviously in turn, and the first person to hit the egg obviously won the money. You can't believe how much fun you can have with one chicken egg. But one of my trainers was a guy called Peter Nell, and he had a Wesley Richards 458. Beautiful rifle. This rifle had a 28-inch barrel, which we used to tease him about the length of the barrel, but it was so beautifully proportioned and so well made and balanced that it was a beautiful rifle to shoot. And he was so proficient with this rifle that on 4 occasions he hit, at the first time he shot at the egg from 50 meters with his open sight at 4.58. He hit that egg 4 times in a row on 4 different occasions. My claim to fame was I managed to hit it at 40 meters with my 505 Gibbs once. So the competition was you start at 50 meters and everybody has a shot at the egg, and if nobody hits the egg, then you go 5 paces forward and you shoot again, and you go 5 paces forward and shoot again until eventually someone hits the egg. But this colleague of mine, he would shoot last because he knew that he was going to hit the egg, and then everybody would have a shot at it, and he'd just step up to the 50 meters and standing and shooting, no rest at all, just stand and shoot and hit an egg at 50 meters with a 4.58. That's the sort of level of performance that we got to by practicing and being able to shoot really well, is to shoot like that.
And then in combination with the evaluation that you were giving your professional hunters before they got licensed, that was another excellent demonstration, I think, of showing something under somewhat realistic conditions and testing not only the accuracy but the reliability of the rifle in question as well as the hunter. And I was very impressed with that story about the guy using the Ruger number 1. It shows what a guy can do if he's really motivated and practices a lot.
It's interesting. I forgot to mention earlier on that every rifle seems to have some little quirk. And when we used to do these dangerous game courses, we never did a course where we didn't find a problem with 1 or 2 rifles. And the Ruger M77 Mark II, that the ejector blade on that rifle is a little blade that's in the bottom of the receiver that lifts up as you pull the bolt backwards. And if you work that bolt really quickly, like trying to recycle it really quickly, sometimes we manage to get the bolt past the ejector blade before that chance to lift. If that little groove where the ejector blade sort of folds down into is not perfectly clean, or if the ejector blade little spring that lifted up the ejector was weakened by eventually, we had ejection problems. Also with that Ruger, that same rifle, the bolt is rearwards, and by some ways, as you're pushing it bolt forward, you push the safety catch on it. The safety catch seems to fit into a recess which stops the bolt going forward. And there was a South African professional hunter recently got very badly gored by a buffalo in South Africa, and that was exactly what happened. In the buffalo charged him, he managed to get a shot off, and as he reloaded and as he pushed the bolt forward again, somehow, I think in panic, the safety catch was pushed forward at the same time, and he just got a jam, and then the buffalo got him and his rifle jammed like that. So it all boils down to just being thoroughly practiced, and you can't beat muscle memory. So if in these situations like that, you just got to make sure that you know your rifle, you practice dry firing with it, you practice reloading with it until eventually all of that just becomes an absolute second nature, and that hopefully will prevent any injuries further on down the line.
No, definitely, and also like you talked about with the extractor getting ripped off of the Remington 700. I mean, those things happen sometimes, and it's best to learn those things in a controlled situation where your life is not on the line, and if something goes wrong like that.
Very much so. I really agree with you.
Well, Kevin, it was great having you on the show again today. Just like we did last time, I will put some links to your website, where people can buy your books, etc. As we wrap up today, is there any last things that you want to share with the audience?
No, I think I've just about covered everything. I don't really, and I think just make sure if you're going to go on a hunt, I think people get so much more pleasure out of the hunt if they mentally and physically prepared for it properly. I'm a great believer that you can learn to shoot without having to fire off lots of ammunition. Maybe I've got one little last story that I can just possibly share with you.
Sure.
So when I was at the Wildlife College, we were tasked with taking some local people from the local African community and training them to become dangerous game field guides. So eventually we had a selection program. We selected 10 young African ladies, and we had 3 months to teach them how to shoot. And now these were people that have never seen a firearm in their life before, never held a firearm in their life. And what we did, we gave each one a piece of about a 40-inch long piece of borehole well piping, and it weighed 5 kilograms, 12 pounds. It was meant to be the weight of their rifle. We painted the pipes green, and one end of the pipe had we painted it red. That was the muzzle. And every morning we would line these ladies up, and we make them do a gun mount, teach them how to do a gun mount. Because they say it takes 10,000 repetitions to develop muscle memory. And in 3 months, they lifted this pipe up, and we got their style correct. They would do half an hour sort of gun drill each morning with these pipes. And within 3 months, all 10 of them passed the intermediate large rifle handling with a 4.58. So if you want to be licensed to carry a rifle in the Kruger National Park, you had to go through a shooting test. And we managed to get all these ladies to pass this test within 3 months, and we taught them how to shoot with a piece of pipe. Once they got their gun mount right, then we started training them on a .22, then we went to a 308, and then we went to a 375, and then we gradually progressed to a 4.58. And we taught those ladies to shoot in 3 months. From never having a rifle before, all of them were intermediate large rifle certified after 3 months. So it certainly can be done. And I'll tell you the story because people, if they're going to go on a hunting safari and the hunt stand, just going, well, then, it's certainly just, for heaven's sake, just learn how to shoot your rifle properly. I mean, just make everybody feel happier and more confident. So, that's about it.
Oh, that's a good story. You took some people that had no experience, but they also had no bad habits. And it just goes to show that if you start with someone with a clean slate and you instruct them properly and they want to do it badly enough, then they can certainly do it.
And it was quite interesting. They had everywhere they went, they had to carry this piece of pipe. So when they went to dinner or to go to the toilet, they had to take their rifle with them. And we also had one piece of pipe that was filled with lead, and it weighed 30 pounds. So if they dropped their rifle, or they let it fall, or they misadvertently pointed the barrel of their rifle at someone, they had to then carry we call it the punishment pipe. And we used to take them for a walk, and they'd walk around with this 30-pound piece of pipe, and they very quickly learned how to good sort of safety etiquette. And it was a pleasure to see how quickly they learned and how they responded. And one of the young ladies, I mean, she could have shot in the Olympics. She had the most beautiful gun mount, and she was just absolute natural. And it was just nice to be able to train them, as you say, with a blank slate and just teach them gun handling and gun safety and all that right from the start. And it was really quickly how they learned to shoot really well.
Oh, all right. Well, very interesting. Thank you for sharing that with us. And once again, thanks a lot for joining us on the podcast again.
It's a pleasure, and really enjoyed it. Thank you very much.
Okay, now before we go into a recap of that discussion, I need to make a quick correction to my statement about the 375 Ruger. With typical factory loads, it's capable of shooting the same weight bullet around 100 feet per second or so faster than the 375 H&H. So it's certainly faster with the same length barrel, etc., but not usually 200 or 300 feet per second or more, like I originally said. Okay, now in any case, I don't know about you, but I thought that was a very enlightening conversation, and I learned a lot. As you probably realize, there simply are not very many rifles in current production that can reliably perform under the extremely demanding conditions that are commonly encountered while hunting buffalo. Now, the shooting test that Kevin described was specifically designed for professional hunters, not necessarily for clients. So you could certainly go on a buffalo hunt or two with a rifle that did not meet those exacting standards and still have a great deal of success. That said, the test really does a good job of separating the wheat from the chaff when it comes to both hunters and rifles that are up for the job. All things considered, it's probably better to have a rifle that can perform under those conditions than one that can't. And the same thing goes for your marksmanship skills as a hunter. So you're definitely not wrong to be practicing under the conditions resembling what Kevin described in that test. And just to recap, they had 3 1-meter squares of cardboard set up at 30 meters, 20 meters, and 10 meters. On the back side of each one of them, they had a 6-inch inner bullseye and an 8-inch diameter outer bullseye. You'd shoot one shot at 30 meters, one shot at 20, and then one shot at the 10-meter target, then reload 3 shots, then one shot at the 10, one shot at the 20, then one shot at the 30. So a total of 6 shots, 2 at each target, and you get 5 points for an outer bullseye and 10 points for an inner bullseye. It's a time test, so just divide the number of points by the time that it took for you to complete the whole deal to get your score. Now, for most hunters, I'd say it's probably a good idea to modify that test a little bit. The first shot on your actual hunt is probably going to be at, say, 50, 75, maybe 100 yards, but probably no further than that. So we're not talking about very long-range shooting here. And also, the good news with buffalo is that being so big, their vitals are correspondingly large as well. So you don't need a half MOA or even 1 MOA accuracy out of your buffalo rifle. Far from it. Now, I'd advise sighting in your rifle from a bench and then do all of the rest of your shooting standing from sticks. That will reduce the felt recoil from your rifle, and it's also just more realistic because that's how you're going to be shooting on your hunt. Practice on a setup similar to what Kevin described, but instead of 30, 20, and 10 meters, I'd recommend going with something like 75 yards, 50 yards, and 25 yards. In real life, most buffalo are going to run away from you after that first shot, not charge you straight off the bat, though that does happen too. So maybe mix it up a little bit. Maybe shoot the 75-yard target, then the 50-yard target, then the 25-yard target one time just to simulate the buffalo running towards you, and then the next time shoot the 50-yard target, then the 75-yard target to simulate the buffalo running away. After you shoot your last target, top off the magazine of your rifle. The important thing here is to shoot from a realistic position, then get used to working your bolt and reloading the rifle, then quickly getting back on target, in this case a different target to simulate an animal that's moved, and then taking a fast but aimed follow-up shot. Then get in the habit of topping off your rifle magazine. All of this will accomplish several things. First, you'll improve your marksmanship under more realistic conditions. You'll also put your rifle and your ammo and your scope through their paces and hopefully discover any reliability issues while you're practicing so that you can get them fixed before your hunt. And then finally, you'll also start to make all those little but very important things into habit, like quickly cycling your action, reacquiring your target, and then reloading your magazine when you get a break in the action. If you do all of that stuff religiously before your hunt and are well prepared, it will pay big dividends when you get over to Africa for your hunt. And like Kevin said, it will be immediately obvious to your professional hunter when you get there that you took your preparation serious and you're ready to go.
Now, if you enjoyed this video, please make sure you subscribe to my YouTube channel right now. Just click the red subscribe button below to make sure you don't miss out on any of my new videos about hunting gear reviews, cartridge comparisons, and more. Now, for more detailed information on popular hunting cartridges and what they are best suited for, click on the link in the description below or go to huntingguns101.com to get a free ebook I have written on the best hunting calibers. Now I'm going to turn it over to you. What rifles have you had the most success with in Africa, and what do you think about Kevin's recommendations? Let me know by leaving a comment on this video right now. Thank you for watching. Have a great day and good hunting.